Welcome to the Tom Sumner Program. This is going to be a packed show today. Paul and I were talking just before we got into the theme music there that we had odds and ends, but there are a bunch of them. But we're going to start out in the first part and have a conversation about the race for the Michigan's 5th Congressional District in the U.S. House of Representatives. But I'll introduce the panel first. I'm Tom Sumner, and I guess I've got this backwards, guys. On my right is Flint's premier political pundit, unusual. Paul Rosicki, and on my left is the Republican candidate for the U.S.
Right off the bat, Tom.
The Republican candidate for the U.S. House of Representatives, Alan Hardwick, is here. Alan, it's nice to meet you, and thanks for coming by.
No problem.
And we're pretty informal here in what we talk about, what we get into. But I'm going to start right out with one of the tougher sort of process questions, and that is, as a Republican running in the 5th District. Now, I grew up in the Flint area, pretty much always in the 5th Congressional District. Isn't a Republican kind of a sacrificial lamb in that race?
You know, I think it can be. At this point, though, I think that people are ready for change, and a lot of people are saying to me when I went campaigning, when I went to get my signatures, people asked me, "Did you ever run for?" I said, "No." They said, "Well, I'm voting for you," and that's why. You know, people are tired of the people that are just getting reelected over and over and over again and not really representing the people. So I think it's getting to a point where the tides are changing.
Do you feel like you're running against an established institution by running against the Kildee name that's been here for so long?
Almost, 40 years?
Yeah.
It's not only the Kildee name, but it's the unions.
Mm-hmm.
I'm running against the union people that the union are telling them to vote for a Democrat, and I'm also running against the people that have retired. But the problem that we're running that's going to happen is, since Michigan has become a right-to-work state, and since this district actually has lost a lot of union jobs, the job market has dropped. The manufacturing job market in Flint alone has dropped 57% in the last 10 years. And I would guess, I don't know exact statistics, but I would guess the majority of those were union jobs. And, people are realizing that, at least I'm hoping they're realizing that the unions may be backing the Democrats, but the Democrats aren't backing them. And people need to wake up and realize that it's not about the people anymore, but it's about who is going to scratch their back to get the person in office.
Are you finding union support? I mean, some union support coming across?
No.
I mean, retirees of any kind?
Well, I can't say for sure if I'm getting support from people that, that they're generally not going to say, "Oh yeah, I'm in the union, I'm going to support you."
Mm-hmm.
But I can tell you that there are a lot of people that have realized that the Democrat Party does not have their best interests in mind. And I believe that if we can get participation votes, I'm not as much worried about swing votes as I am about getting the people out to vote.
I want to talk a little bit about you before we get into some of the issues and the campaign. And I want to give you an opportunity to explain a little bit, and we'll start with why run for Congress. It seems like such an ugly business, and you seem like a pretty nice guy.
Well, that's exactly why. There's too many people that are in there for the wrong reasons. And, I mean, we can see that every day. We have had, like you said, the Kildees have been running this show for 40 years.
Yeah, I think it was 38 for Dale and now 2 for Dale.
Gerald Ford.
It's about 40
Gerald
years.
Ford was the last one. Well, I don't think he was. It's been redistricted so many different times.
Kildee went to Washington with Carter.
That's right. 1976 is when Dale got elected.
So it's.
And I think the last Republican to win this area was a fellow called Chamberlain, maybe in the early 60s, late 50s, maybe. Well, it was only part of
Gerald Ford
Genesee
had it since from 1948 to 73, if I remember right.
Not the 50th.
Not here. And that is over in Grand
Well,
Rapids.
that was when it was the 5th district then.
Oh, the same number, yeah.
Yeah, same
Yeah,
number,
but
but
then
it's
up-
been redistricted.
Yeah, that was the
I mean,
Grand
this
Rapids
was
area
at
for
one
Jerry
point the
Ford.
9th district. And
Yeah, the numbers did change periodically. It was, as you
Yeah,
said, it was
it's-
the 9th
it's
for a
been
while,
changed,
and it
yeah.
might have been the 7th, I think, for a few years.
I'm not sure.
I think you're right. I
Yeah,
remember
the
that.
numbers, but it's been generally
But
the
if-
Genesee County area for the most
But
part.
if you count the Kildees have been here since, you said 77?
76,
Six.
76,
yeah.
yeah. So, that goes to shows. Look at the what's happened. I mean, look at I believe truly in my heart that Flint, or I should say Detroit, is a model of Flint to come, and it's been run by Democrats, and all you have to do is look around and say, what have they done for us?
Well, it's interesting you say that because there was a piece on the news earlier today talking about was it
Yeah.
which report was
It
it? Was
an
it
analysis
Moody?
Comparing.
Was it Moody?
Yeah, no, I had the paper right here.
I'm trying to think. I think it was Moody.
Moody,
that
or one of the financial analysts,
said that
city unlikely to follow Detroit's path to bankruptcy. It was in today's paper.
unless, and I think this is the part that
It's also out here.
that Darnell Early added, unless
They
they
get-
lose the suit
On pensions.
on pensions.
Yeah, that's the big elephant in the room.
But you know what? I think that's all. If anything, that's just going to be a temporary fix, and that's what tends to be with the Democrats' party anyway. They like putting a Band-Aid on a broken leg, and say, "Well, that's good enough for now, and let's just kick the can down the road for a little while, and then see what happens." And I don't think the people want that anymore. I think the people really want real change. They voted for President Obama because he promised real change, and that hasn't happened. And they're realizing after 2 terms, I think they're getting buyer's remorse. And I think it's passing down the line. At least I'm hoping that it's passing down the line. And it's
But
gonna
that
stick.
but that raises the question, and I understand the reaction you're getting on doors when people say you haven't run for anything, so I'm going to vote for you. People are kind of fed up with the performances they've been getting from
Right.
elected officials on multiple levels of government, state, local, federal.
Mm-hmm.
But is it fixable?
I think it's fixable if we get the right people in. If we get
But how
people,
many will it take? How many Alan Hardwicks
You know
have
what?
to get elected
You'll be
before
one
you
vote out of
can?
435. Even if you should win, you one vote out of 435.
I mean, I look at Bernie Sanders,
Mm-hmm.
who seems very often to be the one clarion voice because he's independent. He doesn't have to necessarily. He caucuses with the Democrats, and he's considered pretty far left, but he's not locked into that. And that is a rare thing to find in Congress.
Well, I tell people basically you can only run under 2 parties. There's only 2 parties that have a feasible chance of winning. Very rarely does an independent win. So I ran as a Republican, but I tell people generally that I'm a constitutionalist and that we need to get back to our roots as a country. And we've drifted so far away from the original plan of this country that I think that if we just kind of get back to where our founding fathers envisioned for this country, it's going to bring about change in itself.
What does it mean to be a constitutionalist? I see this all over social media, but then it's always followed up with Second Amendment rhetoric.
It's not just Second Amendment. It's about equal rights. I mean, we have too many special interest groups and too many lobbyists in Washington, and what they're doing is they're all screaming, we want our rights, we want our rights. Well, what happened to people's rights, the state's rights? What happened to an individual's rights? And they're stepping on an individual's rights to make a special interest group have more rights than the other, and that's just wrong. We need to bring it back to where everybody is treated equal, no matter what they are. That's what the whole idea of the Republican Party started with Abraham Lincoln, that all men are created equal, and you should not put one above the other. And that's the problem we're running across. It's not run by the people anymore. It's run by the special interest groups and the big corporations.
And that happens on both sides of the aisle.
It
Can you
does.
really tell the difference between a long-time serving Republican and a long-time serving Democrat in the House of Representatives?
You would probably have to go over their voting record, and that is where if they're voting for what's going to benefit them or the corporation, or they're voting for what's going to benefit the people. I've looked at a lot of different voting records. I just recently put up a post on Facebook about the last 2 votes that Dan Kildee voted, and that was sensible bills that were going through, and they passed without a problem. But
You almost used the R word there, Alan. Regulation.
Yeah, almost. They weren't really regulations. It was actually freedom from regulations. One of them was. It was with the EPA and the water. But the bills that went in, they did pass, and they were sensible. And I do believe in sensible regulations. Don't get me wrong. I mean, I believe that there is sensible regulation, but there is abuse of power too.
I've been watching Ken Burns' new
that's a wonderful
documentary
series.
on the Roosevelts, and we'll probably talk about that a little bit later. Plus, coming up in the second hour, we're going to be talking with a young man who goes to Baker College in Owasso and won a global.
I noticed that. I saw that on the
business strategy marketing.
Global business strategy of some kind.
Yeah. And that's going to be real interesting to talk about. But I was watching the Ken Burns special, and he was talking about Teddy Roosevelt, who was a Republican. Okay. And I couldn't believe the regulation. It pretty much makes the claim that what we know of today as government regulation was really sort of birthed by
Teddy Roosevelt,
who was in fact a Republican.
And in fact, he would have had a hard time being elected as a Democrat today with some of the views that Teddy Roosevelt had in the early 20th century. I mean, it was a different Republican Party and different Democratic Party, obviously, in those years. But it really changed our views of government during the early first decade of the 20th century.
That's what you were talking about, constitutionalists. Okay, I believe that as a constitutionalist, that we need to get back to our roots. Now, our roots, goes back to, when I say roots, it goes back to what I believe Abraham Lincoln brought into this country, where the Republican Party started. If you even go back not as far, go back to Kennedy. Kennedy was a Democrat. But probably by today's standard, he'd be considered a Republican. He did have Democrat views on certain things, but he would not put up with communism or socialism or anything like that. And it seems like today this country embraces it. And that's scary.
Is that something that has happened because of arguments that go way back, like Teddy Roosevelt's, that government should be an instrument of good and should curb excesses, and it's evolved into people thinking that government is the answer for everything?
Some people think that way, and it's really disappointing because an individual should be able to think for themselves. Government is not the answer for everything. When we bring in too much government, then it opens the door to corruption and abuse of power. And we no longer become a republic, but we become a democracy or a monarchy. And with the abuse of power I believe we have in right now, we're pretty close to that as it is. And a lot of people say, well, they quote democracy.
Some people credit Teddy for sending us down that road too.
We're actually a constitutional republic.
Right.
Yeah.
People have to understand that. Okay, there is a difference. We're not a democratic republic. That's an oxymoron. You can't say that.
Sure.
We are a republic. Just say your Pledge of Allegiance. It says that we are a republic, and a republic is by the people and for the people.
Yeah.
And we need to get back to that.
Well, but that's always been kind of a misleading thing as people quote the Constitution. When you quote, the famous line from Lincoln's Gettysburg Address,
right.
Government of the people, for the people, and by the people. It's the people picking people to govern.
Right.
I mean, that's the essence of the republic, and that's where we trip back and forth over, we're a republic, but we're spreading democracy around the globe.
But who is actually picking the people? Okay.
Understood.
I'm fighting a race against what would be considered a Goliath. Okay. Who has union backing. And, I just got in an argument with someone on Facebook, or I should say discussion. I shouldn't say an argument. the first thing they brought
I don't
up,
know. I'm on Facebook a lot. It was probably an argument.
the first thing they bring up is the evil Koch brothers. Okay, and if you go and look at what the Koch brothers give, okay, they're number I think 58 on the list on as far as Koch Industries. Now, I do believe that they also do Americans for Prosperity. I think that's what
I
it's
believe
called.
so.
But if you look at the top 20 donors of who gives the most money, I think 10 or 12 of them are unions of the top 20.
And you're talking about giving money for political campaigns.
Yes, for political campaigns.
Right.
So, and money talks. And when you can get, hundreds or millions of dollars into a campaign to get your name out, I don't care who you are. You could be,
Well, Barack
Frank
Obama wasn't
Smith.
very well known
Until he started raising
Yeah.
money.
until he started
Raising
raising
money.
money.
Yeah.
And,
And that's what it is. And the campaigning, if you look at Dan Kildee as his campaigning, most of his campaign fundraisers are in Washington, D.C. They're not here.
In fact, let me ask a question on fundraising here. In terms of your campaign, clearly you are taking on a Goliath. What are the issues you're facing with fundraising? Is the Republican Party coming across with any kind of assistance, or are they just kind of writing it
I am
off?
getting help from the Republican Party, not as much as I'd like to, because they're concentrating more on Terry Lynn Land and on Governor Snyder. But I've gotten some help from them. Most of it is just on my own private contributions. And we're getting a little bit out there and knocking on doors and things like this, getting on the radio and just kind of letting people know where I stand. I'm not your typical politician, and I wouldn't have never have done this if I didn't think that there's a chance. And I think that there's a chance.
and what is it exactly? I've heard it said on a national average kind of speculation that somebody in the U.S. House of Representatives, their first reelection is their toughest.
Mm-hmm.
It's easier to take somebody out after one term. After they get a couple, then it gets harder and harder. This is a unique situation because you have,
He came in on name recognition.
and his uncle held that position for 36 years, as we mentioned
Right.
before. So you go from Dale Kildee to Dan Kildee, and so he has that going for him. But is it because of that, or is it something that you've felt or discovered in talking with people?
Well, like I said, most people are ready for change, and they are sick of all the lies and all of the deception. And, I'm not going to win everybody's vote. I know that.
Well, sure. But win, lose, or draw at the end, come November. When is the election? The 4th. So come November 5th. When you get up in the morning and you look back and you're either the next congressman or you're not. Who are you going to blame for getting you to do this?
Who am I going to blame?
Yeah.
I'm not going to blame anybody.
I mean, was this your idea? Or
This is my idea.
Or did you have, your I don't know, Thursday night card club or your buds or
No,
something sitting around watching a
yeah,
ball game, and they
basically-
said,
what
Alan, you're
caused
always
you to-
talking about
That's a good
this. Maybe
question.
you ought to just up and run.
You know what?
What caused you to run? That's a good question.
And I'm going to be honest with you. This is what my thoughts were, is that I know that if we continue on this path that we're on, if this country continues on this path of overspending, ever increasing government, reduction in everybody's rights, no matter what you do, you can't do anything without somebody yelling at you for something. All the people on Facebook and everywhere, all the social medias, all they do is complain and this and that. And they know that if something's not done, if we don't get good people elected into office that actually represent the people, there's going to be three things that's happened. Well, I can't guarantee the third one, but it would probably fall in line. We're going to have an economic collapse. And a lot of people say, well, that's just doomsday prediction. It's like, no, it's not. It's fact. We cannot keep spending in the way that we're spending and expect us to recover. We've got to start spending less than what we take in. And we can't continue to keep taxing businesses who are the job creators to the point where they're no longer going to be in the United States. Look at Burger King. Burger King says, well, that was a financial move that they did when they bought Tim Hortons and moved their headquarters. They saved themselves billions and billions and billions of dollars, probably on a monthly basis, by doing that because of the lower tax rate. I think Canada has a 22% tax rate, something like that, where the United States is 35%. So they save themselves a ton of money, and it's continual savings. But once we have the economic collapse, we've had so much division in this country, we're going to have a social collapse that's going to follow that. Because this is not going to be like it was in the 20s when the stock market crashed. In the 20s when the stock market crashed, people knew how to take care of themselves. They knew how to grow vegetables. They knew how to farm. They knew how to hunt. They knew how to take care of themselves. They had skills. People don't have skills anymore. They have jobs. And when it gets to the point where you're going to go in and it's going to cost you $2,000 a month to feed your family and you're only making $1,800 a month, people are going to find ways to do it. And they're going to probably turn to crime, a lot of people that can't make it. And that's going to cause a social collapse.
Well, and you've got, in an area like Flint, it's been estimated that each year 1,500 people return to Flint from incarceration. Mm-hmm. Now, what happens with those people? What choices do they have?
Well,
and some of them, Flint. You always assume when you say a statistic like that in Flint that it's somebody who killed somebody or did a drive-by shooting or something. Some of these are minor charges.
Petty
They're
thefts,
deadbeat
bouncing
dads.
checks.
right.
Sure.
And I think that the whole justice system needs to be revamped. I heard I went to the opening of the GOP Center in Detroit, mm-hmm. where Rand Paul was speaking, and he said something that I had to think about for a while there. And he was talking about marijuana being decriminalized. Mm-hmm. And the reason he said that is because we have too many people in prisons today that are in there for minor marijuana charges. And when they get out, they're branded for life, and they won't be able to get a good job. They won't be able to be respected in the community.
Well, yeah.
So that's things that need to be addressed.
You touched on an interesting issue there.
People do make mistakes, and when you put them in the prison system because of a minor thing like mm-hmm. that, then that does scar them for life, and then they don't have the opportunities that a person that never went to prison.
Yeah, what strikes me about what you're saying about what Rand Paul says and many other libertarian types, I suppose, is that there are some overlaps between the left and the right. One of those areas is the whole area of prison, law enforcement, militarization of police, and so forth, whether those two wings of Democrat and Republican Party have rarely agreed on much. But I suspect there's some grounds for some agreement on some of those issues, at least in terms of the prison, crime control, similar issues. Any thoughts upon that? Do you see yourself possibly working with somebody on the left on those kind of issues, if you had the opportunity?
If I had the opportunity, I don't mind reaching across the board. Reagan had no problem reaching across the board. If they can deviate from standard party lines, that's the whole thing. People need to start thinking for themselves. A Democrat and a Republican may have certain key things that they believe in, but you can't just throw away your moral ethics or your beliefs or your thoughts or whatever that drives you in your job as a congressman or a senator and say, well, I'm only going to do this because the party tells me that's what I need mm-hmm. to do.
Right.
We need to think for ourselves instead of going by, well, is this going to hurt me or is this going to benefit me when it comes election time?
We went off on a tangent a little bit. I wanted to give you an opportunity to talk a little bit about, who Alan is and what you've done. You're self-taught IT mm-hmm. professional. You run your own company. You've been very active in your church. And I want to give you a chance to talk about some of those things, but also in the context of explaining what you think, what you've learned through those accomplishments, what that gives you to bring to the table, to take to Washington to represent people here with.
Well, I think that every experience that we have in life teaches us for what we're going to have to do in our future. I really do. I think that everything we have to learn from our experiences. Now, I started off in high school, and this is one of the things that's on my platform about education reform. I believe we need to bring back the industrial arts programs. I believe we need to bring back the life skills programs. They don't have those anymore. And we have a whole generation of people right now that are retiring, that are your carpenters, your electricians, your automotive mechanics, all those people, and we don't have anybody to replace them. Those fields are in desperate need of those type of people, and it would also bring more, because I grew up with that. I grew up as an electrician. I went 2 years in my last 2 years of high school as an electrician. And
at a skill center.
At a skill center, yeah. And I followed up on that briefly for a short time as an electrician, but it grew, and I started getting into computers. I worked in a clean room and built hard drives back in the 80s. And then when the internet developed, I got interested in that and went into the electronics field. And I've always got a strong electronics background. I used to build my own radios when I was in high school. I don't know if you guys remember Heathkit.
I certainly do.
Yeah.
I had one
You
myself,
bet.
as a matter of fact.
Heathkit, and
I was always very involved in music, and there were Heathkit amplifiers that guys
I built my own
and-
home stereo when I was
Yeah.
15 years old. And my dad was an engineer, and he had that type of a background. But I think that we need to, draw upon every resource that we learn throughout life to make us who we are. And that's what I want to bring to Washington is first of all, I want to bring my knowledge of the private sector, okay, and what people are doing. It's how can anybody that makes $1 million a year or more really represent somebody that's making 30,000? That somebody has to say, well, let's shop around for auto insurance because the price of gas went up this week. And when they don't have to worry for nothing, then they don't have to face what other people have to face, and they don't understand what it's like. I have that background. With my business, I've geared my business to not be a business that would try to soak as much money out as people as you can. I do website design and computer repair.
But, interesting, I referenced the Burns documentary on Roosevelt's playing on public television this week. And that's one of the things that they point out. They talk about these people of privilege who advocated on behalf of regular folks. And they talk about different ways about how they became aware of there was even a problem. There's a funny anecdote last night on the program about Eleanor Roosevelt dragging Franklin as a state house member.
The settlement house, and the first time he'd ever seen poverty
didn't
like
know
that.
that there were people who lived like that anywhere in the world.
Right.
But yet they talk about putting checks on the free market system, that unchecked, it would almost always pool the money, in a small center or at a peak of some kind.
There always has to be some sort of. I talk about sensible regulation.
Okay. Let me finish my point, because you said exactly what I've been saying all along. There have been business people, and in some cases very wealthy people, who were concerned about community and some sense of fairness. And where has that gone in the modern entrepreneur? Do you understand what I'm saying? I
It's
know
all
some
about
guys
the money.
from a different.
It's all about the money.
But
That's
I've
what it
known
is.
guys in previous, they're older generationally, but they always gave something back to the community. They always made sure, that if they did well, everybody does well. And what happened to that mindset?
Well,
because that wasn't a Republican Democrat.
No, it
thing.
wasn't. That was that was. I truly believe that was a.
Was that limited to post-World War II or something?
Well, you can take a look at the famous names even around here: the Motts, the Ballingers, the Kogels.
I think it was
always been
values. People's
benefactors.
values are different. Were different then than they are now. I mean, church participation is one. Okay, I spent the last 10 years at a wonderful church in Ypsilanti and served in many capacities. But see, that's what I said, served, okay? A lot of people go to church wanting to get something out of church instead of going to church and serving. We have a lot of people that are there to, get the word and to hear the music and whatever else, but when it comes to
Very
them
often
wanting
they're there to
them
be
wanting to
seen.
put their time and effort into helping the church or helping the church help the community, then it's a different story. Okay, I've always been very active in my church as a servant, and I think that's the type of person that needs to be in Washington, is a servant, someone who's going to serve the interests of the people, not serve the interests of the special interest groups or the big business. And that's where I'm coming from. I think that's probably one of my strongest points, is that I have a heart of a servant.
Which is ideally what
me
you
ask a
would
tough
want in an
question, yeah.
elected
Let
representative.
me ask a tough question. If you got elected, and 2 years, 4 years, 6 years down the road, all of a sudden you're getting $10, $20, $30,000 checks from the General Motorses or the UAWs or the other major concerns. Would you be able to say no to them if you're running a $1 million campaign and 2/3 of your money has come from major corporations and or unions? Could you say no to those folks?
If it was strictly for campaign purposes, I would probably accept it. But if at the end, when it's all done and said, that money would be distributed to worthy organizations.
All right.
Wouldn't be anything I would want to be as personal gain. And if it got to the
You're
point,
not concerned about the day that a big contributor
If
of
it
$50,000
got
or
to that point,
$100,000
no,
comes in and says, "Hey, we really need you to go with the group on this," and you owe us.
Everybody is not above that. I mean, even Solomon in the Bible was the smartest man alive, according to biblical scripture, and he even fell towards certain things. Okay, we're human, but if we get it, I'm hoping that if I get to that point, if I ever get to that point, that's the point I would say, okay, I'm done. I'm out of here. It's some time for somebody else to be elected.
If you can't do it without the support of people that would want to chain you to certain positions.
I will not bow down to special interest groups. That's one thing. If I had the power right now today, I would say, and I don't believe in limiting funds or anything like this, because I believe it does take money to win an election. Okay, but I would say that if someone were to come up to me and say, you know what? Okay, here's a for instance. This is what I found out.
Well, corporations people.
Exactly, but
money speech.
Look at the Keystone Pipeline. Okay, I can't say this is the gospel, but from what I understand, the reason why the Keystone Pipeline is not being built is because right now the railroad hauls all the oil, and they get approximately $40 a barrel to haul that oil. And if the Keystone Pipeline's built, it will only cost $10 a barrel. So they stand to lose a lot of money. So I'm sure that is
Now, I know
pressure.
a lot of tree huggers that want to say that it's for environmental reasons.
Yeah, but you know what?
I notice a lot more oil cars. When I see a train go by, there's a lot of oil cars on those trains these days.
And you know what? I've talked to people in the agriculture industry too, and you know what they're telling me? They're saying we can't get train cars to haul our grain because all the oil companies are booking, and they get more money for hauling oil than they do for hauling grain. So
I'm glad you brought up morality, because I saw that you'd been very active in your church and had held many positions. There are an awful lot of religious organizations putting pressure on political people for making moral decisions and should those things be separate? If if we're
Are you
becoming...
saying, do I believe in separation of church and state?
Well, but it's more complicated than that, because with all the morality I hear people espousing, we seem to be getting less and less moral.
Well, that's because...
Why wouldn't that work?
Well,
If we go ahead and and we do allow faith-based initiatives to coexist with government initiatives, why isn't that working? Why isn't it doing better?
What is the difference? Let me ask you this. What is the difference between, say, the Catholic Church wanting to not have the Obamacare mandate for birth control, okay, but we've got other groups that say, oh yeah, that's something we need to have, okay? What groups, in your opinions, do you think get more attention? The groups that side with the person in power. They get the most attention. So it's not about separation of church and state, it's about who is holding all the keys. And that's what it amounts to. And right now in government, we have a very small minority of special interest groups that's getting the majority of the attention. Is that representative of the people? It's not.
Is that the fault of government, or is that the media in some ways?
It's the fault of all the politicians that's out there. It is the fault of the media. If the media would report the news, the whole story, and not just what fits right with the administration, which we have a lot of media out there that does, maybe people could make an informed decision on who to vote for.
Would bringing back prayer in schools, bringing back corporal punishment, that's a new one in the news over the last couple of days because of the video of
the NFL
sports figure that
Peterson.
had
Yeah, I heard about that. I was actually listening to Rush about that.
He wasn't. He didn't spare the rod.
Yeah,
and
apparently not.
And so now he's facing some wrath.
There's a difference between corporal punishment and child abuse. Okay, I truly believe there is a difference. I was spanked as a child. It didn't hurt me. It taught me actually respect. And we have clear evidence that because that has been frowned upon for the last, 20 or so years, we have a whole generation of people that don't know respect. And it's clear evidence. I mean, I believe myself as a Christian and as a father. I have 5 children. And I believe that there is a time where a child timeout just won't work. And they need to know.
We have to back the thread up with something.
You have to, just like my mother always told me. She says, when it comes to children, mean what you say and say what you mean. And don't give them false punishments. Don't say, well, if you do that again, you're going to get spanked, and don't get carried through with it. Because they're just going to do it again and again and again and again. And eventually a child will do that. But eventually they're going to learn. Eventually. It may take, look at the children of Israel. They went around the mountain for 40 years, okay, before they actually learned. So, it may take some time, but they do learn. Eventually they do learn. And it may take them till they're 40 when they have kids of their own. And they realize, hey, you know what? Mom and Dad were right.
Right.
But as far as in schools, I had it in school. It didn't bother me. It didn't hurt me. It was more of an embarrassment than anything else.
That's true. I think
I was the recipient of the occasional paddling.
I think that should be a parent's choice. I don't think that should be the government's choice. I think the government is involved in way too much. I think that should be, if you want to go up and say, you know what, if my child misbehaves or hits this other child, it's okay to swat them. Some parents will say that's okay. Some parents say it won't. Mm-hmm. Okay.
Well,
I was never abused in high school.
I never felt abused there, and I'm not going to say that my dad never got carried away and maybe went a little too far, but I never felt abused. It always seemed
justified.
Well, I guess I won't be doing that anytime real soon.
Try their plan B.
That one really ticked him off. But corporal punishment aside, and getting back to this respect thing, aren't there certain people in society that used to be designated as people that you respected, and are we losing the ability to have respect for authority figures, for example, or have the authority figures let us down to the degree that they don't deserve the respect they once got?
I don't think that we have good leaders in office, truthfully. I don't think that...
But I'm thinking about teachers and policemen and sports heroes and, actors.
You have to do that. Well, that's a whole different story there with actors.
Not when you think in terms of the impact they have on young people.
I know that. And that's, it comes down to money, okay? A long time ago, they found out sex sells, okay? How many times I I grew up in the 60s, in the 70s. There was never sex on television, never. Okay, and
Ozzie and Harriet had separate beds.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I remember, I think it was like in the early 70s, the first time you ever heard a toilet flush was on the All in the Family.
All in the Family.
Yeah.
And that was considered taboo. I mean, look at in the 60s, interracial kiss between Kirk and Uhura.
Yeah,
okay?
Nichelle Nichols and William Shatner.
And it's two of my favorite actors. I grew up, I'm a Trekkie, I grew up in that generation.
What were the odds that somebody that's in an IT business
That's
was
right,
going to be a Trekkie? What were the odds, Alan?
Yeah.
So, I think that the people that we look up to need to have more moral clarity, a better moral compass, because that does direct our young people. That does direct the direction of their thinking.
What kind of role should government play in that?
Should
government play a role?
I
in
don't
trying
think
to
so.
define it?
I don't think that.
It's just more a matter of example.
I don't think government.
Let me tweak that a little bit. To what degree can you represent a district and be a leader at the same time? When is it appropriate to supplant your opinion versus the people you represent?
Well,
I mean, you can't do things by a
No, you
poll,
can't. I
or
mean, you can't.
You know.
Well, I'm not. Like I said, I'm not going to bow down to special interest groups. Okay, I think that by large part, especially the older generation, they have a pretty good moral compass, and even though that we have a generation of people here that don't have a good moral compass, in their hearts, I believe they do, and because they've had grandmothers and mothers and fathers. There's
But
not
I would
a lot of
I would
people
argue in cities like Flint and Detroit, Pontiac, Saginaw, all up and down the I-75 corridor, certainly urban areas in other states around the country, that there are 2 and 3 generations now of people who...
Of kids raising kids, unfortunately, sometimes.
But you know what? Look at history. Okay, if you look at history, everything changes. There's just like periods of weather. Okay, we have summer and we have winter. Okay, if you look at history, look at the Roaring '20s. The Roaring '20s, everybody was, wild and loose, and alcohol ran.
Everybody was hammered.
Yeah,
and then Prohibition.
Of course,
50s,
I argue that everybody's hammered now, but it's on prescription medicine.
Exactly. In the 50s, the moral compass came back. Okay, and people got more into conservatism, and I think that we're heading that direction. I mean, we're not going to. I'm not in office to change people's moral compass. Okay. The reason I'm running is because
that's an important thing, because so much of the political rhetoric that we hear now, and I would say that, based on my Facebook page, most of it is around Second Amendment or right to life.
Mm-hmm.
And I
or
don't know.
First Amendment.
Well, that's becoming a thing now, especially with
So some of the
with
NSA
this-
stuff is generating some
Yeah.
of that.
well, that and also well, that's a privacy.
I-
That's more of
yeah,
a Fourth
yeah, and
Amendment
the- and
thing.
the,
But
Corporations.
but when you're
speaking.
talking about free speech, that's going to be an interesting thing to see how that gets used in this. What is it called? Net neutrality.
Oh yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
You know, that's going to be at the heart of the issue for a lot of people. Oh, like FlintTalkRadio.com. I mean,
Exactly.
You know, small
Are they going to get priority
places
on
that are
on-
trying to,
Well,
get
you know,
out
it's the
and do
same thing in
things.
the church too. They want to censor. They've already done it in Canada, where if you talk anything that is offensive to certain groups, if you talk about abortion or if you talk about homosexuality, in Canada, you can actually go to prison as a minister. And they want to push
For
that issue here.
advocating it outside their church, like on
No,
social
for
media,
preaching
or
about it.
even from
Preaching
the
about
pulpit.
it in their own pulpit.
It's being defined as what, hate speech
How
or
did
something?
Being defined as hate speech.
How did it get to be? How did we get to be that intolerant?
You know, one group says it's intolerant, and the other group says that it's morally wrong. Okay,
That what's morally wrong?
that certain lifestyles are morally wrong.
That
But you know what?
Islamics
Morals,
believe in, in Allah, or that Christians follow Christ, or
well, morals is something that each person has to define for themselves. Okay, my brother recently passed away in I think it was 2004, and he found God at that time, which I'm glad he did. But he was a heavy alcoholic and he used marijuana, and his before he died, he's like, well, I'm going to quit drinking. I know that that's wrong. And I said, well, what about the marijuana use? Well, he says, I don't think that's going to hurt me that much. Which he passed away shortly after that. But he had abused his body for so long that he had, 45 years old, he's got cancer and liver failure and kidney failure and severely overweight, and he was a diabetic. He'd been a diabetic since he was 10 years old. And, you just can't treat your body like that and expect it to live 100 years. But, his compass, all that mattered to me is that he accepted Christ in his life. And when we accept Christ, and you can tell I'm a heavy Christian, when we accept Christ, it's not the church's duty or the government's duty or anybody else's duty to change our moral compass. It's up to ourselves and our walk. And I believe that this country is getting ready to shift its moral compass. Not everybody.
well, it'll never be everyone,
It'll never be everybody.
but certainly
But
there's
it does
a
go in
case to be
phases.
made that mainstream has become polluted.
It has.
You mentioned,
and it does have
sex
to
and
do with- it
violence on
does have to do
television
with-
has
with-
always been at the
with
core of
our
that
actors
discussion.
and our television, what we see. It's what we see, what we read, what we hear. We have to be discerning on what we're seeing, and we have to, if you are affected by certain things, look at okay.
I think I don't want to spend too much more time on the religious part because I want to see
like video games. Okay, let me make this
Sure.
point about video games.
Yeah,
okay?
go ahead.
We have an industry that puts out 90% of their video games are violent video games. Okay, some people just can't handle it. I mean, granted, there are people that can play it all day long and it won't affect them, but there are some people that are sensitive to certain things. Just like there are some people who can't watch certain movies. That it can affect them in ways that they don't realize.
Yeah, but I remember my parents' generation being all concerned about the Three Stooges. And
I recall the thing about comic
and
books.
Warner
Well, you know
Brothers.
what?
I recall in the 50s
how
the
that
comic
was
books were
gonna
supposed to be
impact
outside.
us.
Nothing compared to what we've got.
And
today.
That's
I've
true,
never
but-
hit anybody on the head with a bowling ball.
No, I
Tempting
have neither.
though it might be.
Well,
But like you said, like we were talking about a moral compass, the moral compass was different back then.
Yeah.
Okay.
And you see a time ahead where it
I
will
think
shift
we're having a
back,
shift back, yes.
where it will shift back on its own without, say, government intervention.
Yeah, I recall when
necessarily.
they wouldn't show Elvis on television because it was so immoral.
Yeah.
He's not
Because
going
of
to
his hips gyrating.
Yeah, that's right.
They thought
Yeah.
that was very, very immoral.
Yeah.
I mean, it's never going to be like the Ozzie and Harriet days. It'll never be like that, okay? I'm not saying that that's what I'm wishing for, but
No, and in
but
some ways,
you know
who,
what?
who would want to go
I do
back?
want.
Those weren't always the good old days in other ways, too.
I do
yeah.
want the establishment of the family back. I think that's very important in today's society, and I think that is what is killing our society right now is the lack of both parents in the home.
But is that something for society to figure out, or is that something that
Society
government
is going to have to figure it out. That's not anything government can do. I mean, all we can do is truthful reporting and say, you know what, if we're going to change, it's not going to take. Okay, if you've gone to my website, I think on the first page I put on there that no government program will bring anyone out of poverty, and that's true. Okay, it's never going to happen.
Yeah, there's a great analogy too, and I can't remember. I wish I could remember because you said.
It's going to
I
take
think
each.
was it a Reagan quote, maybe, about giving somebody enough stuff to be solvent, and I can't remember what the analogy was, but it's a great website, by the way, and you should probably plug it right now in case we get close to the end and we forget.
If anybody wants to go to my website, I actually have a Facebook page and a website. It's alanhardwick.com, ALLENHARDWICK.com. Or if you go on Facebook, just type in Hardwick for Congress.
Okay. Now, just to cap off this, when John Kennedy ran for president in 1960, there were big questions about his Catholicism and would he be answering to the Pope, and he said, no, I answer to the Constitution. You've said you're very involved in your faith and your church, but you're a constitutionalist.
Right.
Do you ever imagine a
I think
conflict
they go,
between those two things,
no,
or
I
are
think
they
go hand in
compatible?
hand. I think that the Constitution was written by brilliant men, and it wasn't a rough draft on how this country is supposed to be run. I think it was a final document. It was drafted by Scripture. I truly believe it was inspired by Scripture of the Bible, and that they are meant to go hand in hand. I believe that it's all about freedom, and it's about individual freedom, and it's not about special interest group freedom or this person's freedom. I think it's about the freedom of people and the limitations of government. And that's the problem that we're running across, is that our government has grown so big that it's interfering with the freedoms of the people. And that's one of the things that we need to do, is we need to get rid of some of the programs that are unnecessary. We need to have accountability. Accountability is a big thing. I don't care if you're government or business or whatever, you need to be accountable, especially if you own a corporation or if you have a business that can drastically.
Individuals need to be more accountable.
Exactly.
It's across the board, Alan. I agree with you.
Yeah, and we have to run the government like we run our own checkbooks. I mean, how many people do you know of that could sit there and say, well, you know what? I'm going to spend this much money, but I only take in this much money. So what's the government going to say if you told them, well, you know what? I can't pay my taxes this year because I spent $500,000, but I only made $100,000. Okay, so I can't pay my taxes. You think the government's going to forgive you? No, they're not going to forgive you. But that's what the government does, and they're expecting the people to bail them out. And there's no way at this rate of spending that's going to happen. We have to be accountable. And I believe that businesses, and I'm not saying this is government regulation, but I believe businesses that can severely affect our economy need to have more accountability as well.
How would you enforce that accountability? I mean, speaking about businesses, for example, shipping jobs overseas, or some of the things the banks did in the last half decade or so. I mean, how would you make them accountable?
I don't know what the answers are. I think that we need to. I'm a true person that believes in the merit system. Okay, I'm not against unions. Don't think I'm against unions. I think unions have a purpose, and there are businesses out there that could definitely benefit. The employees could benefit from a union, but I don't think it should be mandatory. But I also believe that the merit system is something that needs to be brought back. That if you do a good job, you should be rewarded accordingly. And it really burned me when these oil companies were being bailed out by the federal government, and these people that were doing a horrible job with these oil companies. They were leaving with multi-million-dollar retirements and bonuses and everything else. That's not being accountable.
Well, it was oil companies, it was banks and financial
there was a lot of
institutions too.
AIG is another prime example. Okay,
Corporate welfare.
They got a big bailout from the government, and the first time they got a bailout, they threw a big party or something.
That's right.
And then the second time they got the second bailout, they sent all their high executives to Europe for a hunting trip.
Yeah.
Now, come on. You know, that right there should show you that somebody's did it out of because they had a special interest in it.
We just have a few minutes left, and I want to race through a couple of things very quickly. One is, what are, let's say, the top 3 things you would want to tackle once elected congressman?
Well, I think that the top thing is energy independence. And I know people say, well, that'll never happen. I think we are so close right now that it's got to happen. It's got to manifest. Energy independence is one of the key things that's going to bring back prosperity, because everything that we do requires energy. Okay?
What does energy independence mean?
Well,
some people mean
we
that we're
need
just
to
not
use
going to
our
buy
own
oil
resources.
from the Middle East.
No, you know what? I'm 100% for green energy. Okay, if the technology's there. Right now, the technology's not there. I think that we should explore more green energy programs and perfect it. But we can't just switch from fossil fuels to green energy overnight. It's not going to happen. You know, we can't just say, well, okay, everybody, it's required in the next 5 years, everybody's got to buy an electric car. That's not going to happen. Okay, it's just not going to happen. And we have so many fossil fuel resources in this country here that are untapped. We could feasibly bring down the cost of fuel back to the 1980s levels, back in the $1.50 range. And once you bring that back, the cost of everything will go down. All the food that's shipped, all the food that's farmed, everything will go down, and that will create more jobs. It'll put more money in people's pockets. And that's what it's all about. I mean, people are not being represented in Washington because the price of oil can be dropped down. And people say, well, the president doesn't have that authority. Well, he may not have that authority, but if everybody worked together to make us an energy independent nation instead of buying our oil from our enemies, and if you do
well, again, you get into the thing you said
research
earlier about special interests. If you
Right.
allow the special interests to dictate policy,
and that's what's been going
how
on
do
far
you
too long.
invest in the R&D that needs to be done to get those technologies online?
Private merit system, private. You know,
But thanks to the oil companies, they're fighting against government to do it.
well, you know, there was a big push on E85 just before Obama got elected the first time. There was, I mean, a big push. They had all these farmers set up, growing corn,
Right.
getting ready to produce E85, and all of a sudden gas went from $4 a gallon to $1.50 a gallon, almost overnight. All those contracts got canceled. All those farmers that were promised all these contracts to grow corn for ethanol, it all got canceled. That was the worst mistake that anybody could have made. That's a green energy. To me, that's a green energy. They say that ethanol has a higher carbon footprint, but it is a green energy, and it's
renewable.
It's renewable.
It's renewable.
It's renewable.
We've got about 2 minutes left, and I want to ask you very quickly, and this is really putting you in a bad spot, and I apologize. You mentioned reforming healthcare.
Okay.
in your either on Facebook or the website or both. Very quickly, how would you see it differently than the way it's been set up?
I don't believe in the individual mandates. I think that it should be set up. First of all, I don't believe in the mandate. Okay, I don't think that
What
people
about
should be
individual
required to buy a plan that where a lot of things they would never use.
What about
Okay?
single payer? Or do you think we bailed out the insurance companies?
As a single payer system, I don't think that's going to work either. I think that's going to limit doctors, and it's going to make healthcare worse. And that's been proven in other countries.
I have to wrap this up right now, and I feel bad because we're just getting going, and this has been a great conversation, Alan. It's been a pleasure to
Well, you
meet
can
you.
have
It's been a pleasure.
And don't forget AlanHardwick.com or Facebook/Alan Hardwick. That's ALLENHARDWICK. And you can read lots more about his positions, his values.
And I'm writing more, too.
And thank you so much for being here, and I hope we get a chance to talk again. We're going to take a short break, and we'll be back with part 2 in just a little bit.